Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here on MMA Junkie, we take you on a quick spin through the week's news. This week, we are coming to you live. I'm Simon Head here in Rochester, England, and I'm joined by MMA Junkie Radio's gorgeous Georgian Goes from Las Vegas and Danny Segura from Brooklyn, New York. So without further ado, let's get things started. It is a packed show this week. And boy, are we getting started with a bang, guys. Just moments before we went live on air, we found out that UFC Fight Island is now official. Yas Island in Abu Dhabi is playing host to the UFC's Fight Island events on July the 11th, 15th, 18th, and 25th. And as if that wasn't enough news for us, the UFC has also booked a host of huge title fights. Kamaru Usman will defend his welterweight title against Gilbert Burns. Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier will settle their heavyweight title trilogy. Alexander Volkanovski will rematch Max Holloway for the featherweight belt. And Peter Yan will take on Jose Aldo for the vacant bantamweight strap. Loads to get our teeth into. Let's get things kicked off. Which fight gets your juices flowing the most? And where's the biggest shock going to come from? Danny, kick us off.
I mean, there was one fight here that we kind of did not expect. The others, we kind of knew they were in the works, right? Holloway versus Volkanovski, Stipe versus Daniel Cormier, even Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo. As much as people have criticized it, we knew that it was coming. It's been talked about for quite some time. But boy, Gilbert Burns challenging Kamaru Usman for the welterweight title. I mean, we knew that was a possibility. It's fairly recent, but we knew there was other plays as well. I mean, Conor McGregor was talked about briefly to fight for the 170-pound title. Masvidal it seemed he was the front runner for that moment. And so that kind of caught me a little bit off guard. And to be honest, Durinho Burns is on a really hot run here, and he could be potentially the champion here. I mean, this is a very competitive fight. Let's not forget the two guys are also teammates, so that's going to bring up interesting storylines within itself. Can't wait for that fight for a competitive standpoint. Can't wait for the welterweight division to be going again, and can't wait to see what evolves from Fight Island and everything going on those cards.
Yeah, big fights coming at us in rapid fashion. George, you've seen some big fights down the years. We've got some big ones coming up. Which one tickles your fancy the most heading into these big fights?
Well, as the resident heavyweight here at MMA Junkie, of course I'm going to lean with the heavyweights. Look, man, they're going to settle it all right there. It's a trilogy. They're 1-1. So both guys, have gotten the best of each other on certain occasions, and it's going to be huge for their legacies as well as being able to maybe have boasting rights as maybe the greatest heavyweight ever in the UFC. So starting right there, that's the one that's going to have me on the edge of my seat. Now, that said, again, this is like splitting hairs. They're all great matchups. All those fighters deserve to be in those spots because of what they have accomplished. Maybe not necessarily like most deserving at this moment, because you all know my feelings on, Aldo coming off a loss, second time now at Bantamweight. It don't add up. You got a stacked division. We'll get into that on a couple, one of the other threads coming up here. But the heavyweights, that's the one for me.
Awesome. Goes. Do you agree with your brother, or we got something else in store, do you think? And also, where's the biggest shock?
I have to agree. He is one of the bigger heavyweights. But you know what? When it comes to heavyweights, guys, this is going to go down as one of the greatest heavyweight matchups of all time. We're always comparing ourselves to boxing. Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic is going to be kind of like our Ali Frazier. It's going to be huge for the history of the sport. These are three fights that we're going to talk about a lot this year, but this particular fight is a fight that I feel like we're going to be talking about for ages, because you're going to have two of the best guys. Granted, Daniel Cormier isn't in his prime, but he fights like he is, right? Very tough cat. Stipe Miocic, also going to be one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. This is going to be fun, but the thing that hurts me the most is it's going to be done without fans. When we go back and we look at this, we want to see the roar of the crowd, the walkout, all the things that come with a giant heavyweight matchup. I think it's the biggest one, and honestly, I think it's going to give us the biggest shock as well, because I'm already kind of going through my head how I'm playing this fight out, and I can think of a million scenarios. So we have no idea what's going to happen, especially when it comes to heavyweights. That's my fight.
Yeah, and the other thing you just mentioned there with the no crowd, there's a very real scenario that both the guys in that heavyweight title fight could end up hanging up their gloves at the end of that fight, and they'll be doing so in an empty arena. That will be a very, very bizarre way for two storied heavyweights to wave goodbye to their UFC careers. But someone who looked like they're going to wave goodbye to their UFC career this week was a certain Conor McGregor, who dominated the news cycle after UFC 250 this weekend. The notorious one announced his retirement for the third time during the aftermath of Fight Night this past weekend. But you'll do well to find too many people in the game who actually think he's finished right now. So if we're to assume that this is all just Conor leveraging his position to get the fight he wants, the big question now is, what fight should he be given next? Is it Justin Gaethje for the UFC interim lightweight title? Or is it Anderson Silva in a catchweight super fight? Or is there another big-time matchup that you think could pique his interest and get the Irishman back into the octagon again? Let's get Conor back in the game with a blockbuster matchup. George, kick us off.
You know, it's sad because this guy's going to go down as one of the greats, you know, the highest grossing superstar, the biggest superstar, maybe even a mega star, not just in MMA, but in combat sports. And usually when someone retires, you know, you pay homage and say all these great things. But you're right, Simon. It's the third time. I'm shaking my head because I don't believe it. I think he's going to fight before the end of the year. You know, it's just ridiculous, honestly. And right in the middle of Amanda Nunes' shining moment, you know, she became the first champ to defend both while holding both belts. Anyway, all right, let's get to the question. Anderson Silva, look, these guys just, if you put them in there together at 176, Conor's weighed in at 168, 171, whatever. He can pack on 5 more pounds of muscle, get to 176. I've seen Anderson Silva weigh in at 175 at Rumble on the Rock in 2005, 2006. I've seen him do it. So when he says he can do it, I know he can do it. I mean, it was 15 years ago, but that's what he's saying. So just get those two in that fight. It doesn't bother anyone. He's saying he's bored. He doesn't. I think he's reached the point where he doesn't care if he's in an arena packed full of fans or even a stadium or whatever. And as far as Anderson Silva, look, he's back. He's been having some fun fights. He's got 2 more fights to fight out on his contract. Get them in there. It doesn't disrupt anything. And of course, there's another fight that's painfully obvious, but I'll let the guys chime in. I'm sure they'll probably jump on that one too.
Guys, what do we reckon? I mean, Conor McGregor is a man who's always had options in his career, but it's almost as if he's saying he doesn't have any right now. So this is a bit of an unusual situation. Where does he go from here?
Well, if it were a perfect world and you're trying to rebuild the fighter, get him to deserve a title shot, I would think a guy like Tony Ferguson makes a lot of sense. However, the last picture that we have of Tony Ferguson was not pretty. That was a tough fight. He's recovering from all that. I don't know that makes a lot of sense. Conor kind of plays by his own rules. So really, in this situation where he's sort of in limbo, I like Conor McGregor best when, if you're not setting him up for a world title, you're squashing some kind of beef. And I think now is the perfect time to do that Nate Diaz fight. I think it makes the most sense. You can finally put that to rest, especially if Conor McGregor is at the end, like he really is saying, well, we can't let him ride off without that third fight happening. So I would go that route. However, now with the news this morning and Masvidal being free, that kind of changes the game a little bit too. That's a fight that I feel like if you were to make a poll and told people, forget about rankings, forget about title pictures, what do you think would be entertaining? Those two can sell a fight, definitely. However, the one thing you got to look at is if a guy like Jorge Masvidal somewhat passes on a title shot to kind of get this money grab over here with Conor McGregor, I think it devalues your belt. It doesn't make you look good. So I don't know if they would do that, but I think right now is the right time to do the Nate Diaz fight.
Yeah, Danny, there's many routes we could go here. You could go super fight, you could go trilogy, you could go for the 155 route. I mean, what's your preferred route if you're looking after Conor McGregor right now?
I'd like to offer a little something different here. Conor McGregor, don't eat that retirement cake. Just hold off on it for a second. There's a lot of moving pieces. Let's just wait to see how everything shakes out. For one, I think the obvious one is the Nate Diaz one. That can always happen. It seems like it's a fun fight. They're 1-1. Both guys aren't currently booked. It doesn't disrupt any sort of title implications at either 170 or 155. If anything, it just helps either guy, make a statement to fight for the belt if that's what they want to do down the line. But like Go said, now you got Masvidal freed up since Burns is fighting Usman for the belt. So that could be an option as well. Also, Khabib Nurmagomedov, it seems it's almost like it seems there's already a title unification bout already talked about, and that's what the UFC wants to do between Nurmagomedov and, of course, interim lightweight champion Justin Gaethje. But we know that somewhat recent of headlines came out surrounding Nurmagomedov's father, who's currently, battling some health issues, and it's not looking quite well for him. And we wish him obviously a speedy recovery, and hopefully everything turns out all right. But we don't know how that situation is gonna shake out, and if Khabib is gonna be able to fight in September or this fall. How do you think about it? So McGregor, just don't eat the cake. Stay on weight, see what happens, because I'm not ruling out a fight between an interim lightweight fight between Justin Gaethje and Conor McGregor. And I know Gaethje really wants that fight with Nurmagomedov, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of money to be made in a McGregor fight. So Gaethje, that's still a pretty good option. And hey, you're still defending a belt, even though it's an interim title. So I would say just hold off on the cake. Let's wait to see how everything shakes out, because it seems the UFC, as we just saw moments ago, they're starting to get the ball rolling as far as their international fighters are concerned. So I would say for right now, keep the Nate Diaz fight on lock and think that fight's going to happen, but don't rule out an interim title fight with Justin Gaethje. I think that's a possibility that we need to keep in mind here.
Yeah, and that's the fight that I think McGregor would pick right now. I think that's the one he was chasing and was getting frustrated about in the first instance. Conor's sudden retirement joins that of former two-division champ Henry Cejudo, who stunned everyone by calling it quits after UFC 249. And we've also had like heavyweight champ John Jones and BMF champ Jorge Masvidal going public with their displeasure over UFC fighter pay. Guys, is this all just part of one larger issue with fighters now becoming more willing to stand their ground when they feel they're not getting what they deserve? Or are we reading a little too much into this, and these are just individual situations that are all coming together to form one sort of perfect storm? What's your take on this? Goes, kick us off.
I think they're all individual situations, guys, because to be honest, this is how the business was set up. This is how fighters think, right? It's an individual sport. So trust me, if Jorge Masvidal gets the money that he wants, he's not going to sign that contract and then say, and how about Henry and John? Were they taken care of? That's not how it's been working, guys. Guys have been looking out for each other, or looking out for themselves and not each other. It's a dog-eat-dog type of sport, and I think that's what hurts us in the long run. So each of these are different. Each guy brings something different to the table, and I think they deserve to be compensated for that service. But what's interesting right now, guys, is the fact that if you look at what you said, Simon, the perfect storm, the UFC's backed into a little bit of a corner. Just think about it. No John Jones, no Conor McGregor, Henry Cejudo's gone, Daniel Cormier's on his way out. I don't care how successful your business is. You lose stars like that, guys that are going to be in the Hall of Fame, guys that could arguably be on that Mount Rushmore that everybody talks about one day. I don't care how successful you are, it's going to hurt to lose those guys. So if somehow they could all be on the same page, then yeah, I think they can make a big difference right now, especially everything going on in the world and the way the UFC has to run their business. But I just don't see it.
Yeah, Danny, it's a great point by Goes there. I mean, we've seen the UFC lose big stars before, right? And they've always bounced back, but each star is sort of left individually and they've kind of gone away one at a time. When you've got a situation where you've got a group of top ranked stars who are trying to exert a little bit of leverage against the UFC, does that back them into a bit of a corner? Does that put more pressure on the UFC right now, especially when they're working within a pandemic and everything's a little bit tight right now?
Yeah, no, it does put pressure on them. And we'll see if this has bigger implications than just, hey, let me just throw a little bit of money your way, or maybe a matchup that you want to sort of fix the issue. But although they're all individual cases, they all center around the same thing. Maybe McGregor's not so much, is a little bit different, but certainly Masvidal, Cejudo, and John Jones. I mean, it's all about the money. I mean, these guys are big stars, and John Jones recently said something pretty interesting in a big tweet. He's like, remember, the advice for the young fighters, just as much the UFC is building your brand, you're also building theirs. And I feel like that's something that that's kind of fighters are beginning to realize a little bit. You know, the numbers that we've seen in MMA are doing just as much as the boxing numbers have been doing. And we know the paydays that those big boxers make. And also, for some time, it was always like, hey, let's watch the UFC fights over the weekend. And it's still very much the case how the UFC branding is very much at the top still. But nowadays, it's changed a little bit. And I believe the sport and the UFC especially is a little bit more star driven. Now, guys, you know, and just people in general go, okay, let's watch Conor McGregor's fight. Let's watch John Jones fight. It's not really just about the UFC anymore. So I really do think sort of there's some tides turning. We'll see actually down the line if it has bigger ramifications. But it seems, you know, the fighters are starting to realize with the information that that they've been given, that they've been underpaid a little bit, and they want to make a bigger piece of the pie. And it's not only, you know, a 50-50 split like how it's been compared to other sports. Masvidal even said it on SportsCenter. Hell, we've been happy with 30%. That'd be a 50% increase from what's been reported out there from what they split with its the UFC with the fighters. So we'll see exactly how it plays out, but it 100% puts pressure on the UFC. We've seen already several fighters take on multiple fights within a month, and the UFC put together last-minute fights, and it's fine for now. But once those fighters are unable to take fights and the schedule gets a little bit tougher to fill out, especially with travel bans and restrictions, and you're in need of those bigger stars to draw the numbers, we'll see, you know, how the negotiations turns when it comes to you know, getting those fighters back in action.
Yeah, it's a tough one. We've got a lot of big stars almost holding out. It's almost like the NFL players holding out for a better contract, George. I mean, where's the light of the tunnel for the UFC here? Are we going to get these stars back, or are we going to see some of them fall by the wayside as a result of this situation? What do you think?
Well, first off, I hate going last because these guys took everything. Honestly, they did a great job. But look, I'm just going to carry the baton here. I mean, over the years, we've said this, and we say it to a new generation of fighters. Collectively, if you stand together, you can get so much more. When we point and say, whoa, Damian Lillard from the Portland Trailblazers is getting $40 million for 4 years. That's what, remember everybody how they were freaking out last year when these NBA players were signing the most ridiculous contracts and they were guaranteed. All right. If they got a career-ending injury, guaranteed. Same with baseball. NFL's different. Theirs aren't guaranteed, not like the others, but they get this huge signing bonus. So there's different ways, but all those major leagues have at some point had to call a halt to a season. And sure, the fans didn't like it for a while. The owners didn't like it. The players didn't like it. We have replacement referees in one of the strikes in the NFL, replacement players. But guess what? They always took a step forward. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate Masvidal's advice. It's true, but there's a second part to that, and they have to do it collectively. And the stars have to stand with the young guys. And sure, it might impact them, and they're running out of time because they're mid-30s, upper 30s, low 40s, on their way out. 3 fights left, 2 fights left, whatever. But they got to do it. They got to take one for that team that they all tend to say, hey, look, we're all part of this. We're all in this together. Like Ghost said, if you press a few of them, when's my next fight? All right, cool. Let them worry about it. Especially because this is an international sport. There's a lot of people from countries that are like, what's a union? What's an association? What's the NBA? Who's this guy that's talking to me right now? So, you know, they got to spread the word amongst them, create an association. And I know what I'm saying is probably not going to happen, but that's the way they can do it. That's the way they can fight. And maybe in the first contract, maybe even then they get steamrolled. But maybe in the first contract, they get that fifth $50,000 bonus. Maybe they get a slight retirement fund started. Maybe they go from 12-12 or 10-10, wherever they're at, to 15-15. Well, guess what? When this one runs out, let's say it's a 5-year and it runs out in 2025, you do it again. And the next time it progresses until you reach the point where it's fair and you all are happy. It's going to take small steps, but it's got to be done. It's got to be collectively as a group.
It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this gets resolved in the coming weeks and months. The UFC have got another problem on their hands, and her name's Amanda Nunes. The UFC's dominant women's 2-division champion is clearing out both the bantamweight and the featherweight divisions, and it's becoming a bit of a problem for the UFC's matchmakers as they look to find a legitimate challenge to the Lioness's dominance in both divisions. Dana White ruled out a third fight with the woman who arguably pushed her the closest, flyweight champ Valentina Shevchenko. So let's see if we can help them find a solution. Book us a big fight with Nunes that will capture the imagination of fight fans and push the Lioness to the limit. Who would you pick to face her? Danny, lead us off.
I think the obvious one is Valentina Shevchenko, but I do have some reservations about that bout. I think Nunes, since those bouts, has gotten a little bit bigger, a little bit more of a physical force, given that now she's fighting at 145 and she has to deal with bigger opposition. And at the same time, Valentina Shevchenko has sort of trimmed down a little bit because she's not used to fighting at 135 anymore, but she has to make the 125-pound limit. So I don't know if I want to see that fight. Maybe one of the guys next can convince me. But I think there's an interesting fight brewing, and that is the UFC, I believe, last night. I mean, it was announced that Holly Holm, former UFC champion, also one of the bigger stars, one of sort of forgotten names recently because, you know, she's been fairly inactive, but certainly a big name indeed. She'll be taking on Mexico's Irene Aldana, who I think very highly of. I think Irene Aldana here has a big opportunity to win a big fan base. She's Mexican. We know how Mexico has obviously a deep history in boxing, and just they love striking, and Irene Aldana offers just that. Her boxing is really good. It's crisp. It comes often. It's rangy. And look, if she's able to pick up a big win against Holly Holm, like she did against Caitlin Vieira with a beautiful knockout, I think a potential fight between Amanda Nunes and Irene Aldana, maybe not the biggest bout, but certainly I would say bigger than the bout we saw recently at UFC 250 with Felicia Spencer. And I think from an action standpoint, given the fact that they're both strikers and Irene Aldana has pretty good hands, I think they can offer us something big here. I think that's the next move. Plus, the belt at 145 was just defended by Nunes. 135 is definitely what's coming. I know the UFC are gambling a little bit because I thought Aldana deserved the shot even before this fight with Holm, but certainly the fight with Holm will amplify her stardom if she's able to get a good win. So I have my eye on Irene Aldana, and if she's able to do something, quite spectacular against Holly Holm, I think that could be a big fight against Amanda Nunes.
Great stuff. George, what's your pick?
Well, we got the Aspen Ladd fight coming up June 27th, I believe. So I believe, she lost to Jermaine Durandamy, who already had her title shot. So she's sitting at 9-1. I believe that if she can come back and get a win, she's an option at 135. Danny was saying Irene Aldana, perfect. She's on a 3-fight win streak, and she knocked off the previously undefeated Ketlin Vera. Ketlin Vera can also do an Aspen Ladd, and that's dust herself off, go out there and get a win. But I believe she's kind of stuck on the whole, I got to wait for Fight Island to open up. So we'll see. Now, obviously, there's the Megan Anderson option at 145. She's won twice since losing to Felicia Spencer. But I think the most important thing is, what does Amanda Nunes want to do? Because her and Nina Ansaroff are expecting a baby in September. So either she can do a quick one in August, like up until, let's say, mid-August, and that will give her some time to prep for the baby. And I would say that would be probably more a 45 angle because there wouldn't be that weight cut. And if she's not going to fight till after the baby, then you probably have to give them a couple of months and maybe a November, December bout. Now that opens things up at 135. So I think that's their first decision. What does she want to do? Get one more in quickly or wait till the end of the year? And then that might at least unclear the logjam a little bit, especially at 35. It's
a tough one to pick, Goes. But which one do you think is going to hit the jackpot at the box office, if any? Which one's going to be the biggest option for the UFC as they look to maximize their revenue during this pandemic, do you think?
Well, George, you mentioned you hate going last, and I'm going to show you how it's done. The secret to going last is you say something crazy. And I'm about to say something crazy. Look, I love watching Amanda Nunes fight. However, there's a difference between watching her fight and paying to see her fight. I probably wouldn't pay to see her fight, especially after what just happened, unless there is a really good threatening opponent. And we have some of those. They just need time to develop a little bit more. So what do you do with this big cushion? Guys, this is where you're going to hate me. This is where you think I'm going to say something crazy. But isn't now maybe the time you look at Clarissa Shields? She says she wants to fight in MMA, do a home and away. One boxing, one MMA. There's a difference here, guys. I know we did Conor Floyd. Conor was a great fighter fighting the greatest boxer of all time. There's a difference between being the greatest boxer of all time and the greatest fighter of all time. Clarissa Shields is a fighter. Amanda Nunes is a fighter. And we can all say they're probably going to be the greatest of their sports. So wouldn't now be the time to cash in on something like that? Give the rest of the crop time to develop a little bit more. And once this is done, they're all waiting for Amanda and we go back at it again. But I wouldn't mind seeing this crazy idea come to fruition.
I wouldn't mind that either, Goes, if I'm honest with you. But as well as Amanda Nunes masterclass at the weekend, we also saw some big statements made in the UFC's Bantamweight division as Aljamain Sterling and Cody Garbrandt produced outstanding finishes to push themselves one step closer to a shot at championship gold at 135 pounds. Now, we all know that the UFC are looking to book Peter Yan and Jose Aldo. They've just booked it. So how do we view the rest of the division right now? Who's going to be next? Who should be next? And who's moving their way into contention, who could maybe be challenging for the belt before the year's end? Break down that bantamweight division for us and give us your assessment. George, kick us off.
All right. So with Aldo and Yan now official, I think Aljamain Sterling needs to get on that card and be part of the co-main event. It offers insurance for the different problems that can arise when you book a title fight. Aldo did make weight in his first time. You got to tip your hat to him for doing that. But he's got a coach who I believe was dealing with COVID-19. And all thoughts and prayers to Andre Pederneiras, one of the best coaches out there. And still, Brazil's really, really getting shaken down pretty hard right now with COVID-19. So I think that would be a good fight to have a little bit of insurance. Plus, look what just happened right now. We had 6 bantamweights fighting on Saturday, and there was a big shakeup. I mean, I got a little sheet right here of what I can tell you I think should happen, but it's fun to mix and match. So, again, there was a big spotlight on it. So do that spotlight on the Jan Aldo card. Again, and if one of those falls off, there's Aljamain Sterling ready to step in. And guess what? It's for the vacant title, so he can step in, and we don't have to worry about, this guy's the interim or this guy deserves it or what. No, they all just deserve to be in there. They just chose Aldo versus Jan. Who I would put myself against is probably Cody Garbrandt. The UFC loves Cody Garbrandt. He had an excellent performance. So why not just match those two together in the co-main event? That way you have a clear number one coming out of that night. I have some other matchmaking here if you guys will allow. Sunstyle versus Cruz. Hey, they never fought, and these are WEC OGs. Now, Sunstyle, we probably need to give him a little bit of time off, whereas Cruz seemed like he wanted to come back sooner, so I get that. And then Sandhagen versus Rivera, maybe. Those are other 2 top 10 guys that are left out. Rivera hasn't fought in a minute. Sandhagen probably can get in there rather quickly. But you can mix and match between those if any of them aren't ready, because I don't know who has a medical suspension, who's on their last contract or anything like that. But those are 4 names I think you can mix and match. Finally, Sean O'Malley. Look, I know if I say Cody Staman's going to look at me like, what you talking about, Willis? Because he wants to look upward, right? But these names that are there, if one of those isn't ready to fight Cody Stamann, then perhaps Stamann can fight O'Malley and maybe get a little bit of his shine, because right now there's a lot of shine on O'Malley. And if not, I understand. If Stamann wants somebody above him, cool, let's do that. Then Song Yadong versus Sean O'Malley would make a ton of sense. Now, a lot of people might say they're 2 young guys. Don't pit them that close together. Sorry, this is a stacked division, man. This is the way we roll now.
Yeah, good shout out for Cody Stamann, who for me was one of the stories of the weekend. Going through everything he went through in the past week and getting himself a big win. So all credit and kudos to him. Goes, how do you see this 135-pound division shaking out? Options everywhere you look.
Yeah, they're all over the place. I mean, it starts with a giant headache up at top. The Jose Aldo match, to me, it just really doesn't make any sense, guys. I mean, the guy's coming off 2 losses, but it's there. And I just don't see what you tell a guy like Aljamain Sterling. The guy, a lot of people thought he deserved it before the Corey Sandhagen fight, but he still took the fight, went in there, not only beat him, which is a very tough out, but he finished him. He made a statement. That's the way guys should deserve and earn their title shots. These little things that happen like this, I think, is what creates those scenarios with Jorge Masvidal, John Jones, Henry Cejudo. This is just a perfect example of a guy that did absolutely everything right and didn't get things his way. So honestly, I think I would tell Aljamain Sterling to just hang out. I mean, I don't even know if it's worth risking another fight, because this is a division that's filled with killers. And I think he just waits it out. He's pretty much all but guaranteed that shot. And then Cody Garbrandt, a guy Cody Garbrandt, a guy that just fought this past weekend. Great performance. You know what? The selfish guy in me, I've always wanted to see him and Marlon Moraes lock it up. And they're managed by the same guy, but that's happened before, guys in that stable. So there's a lot of different options out there. I think it'll be fun, but I really think Aljamain Sterling needs to wait and just get his shot.
Yeah, loads of options, Danny. And, a name that's kind of flying under the radar now, which is almost ridiculous, is that of Dominic Cruz, who he still should be in decent shape. He's been in and around the top for so long, and he's still fit enough to go. So, where does he fit into this conversation?
Before we talk about Cruz, I don't know if it's this bantamweight division talk or it's the coffee kicking in, but I am hyped. Talk about this bantamweight division. It's the best ever. It's got a mix of young guys coming up that have a lot to prove. It's got a mix of veterans. It's got guys from 145, legends such as Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo, dropping down to 135. It's got a mix of everything you want and more. This division is amazing. So it's just great to talk about this 135-pound weight class. So Cruz, I think, is in an interesting spot. He said it himself after the loss to Cejudo. He's like, if anything, I got options. Don't worry about me. People are going to call me out, and that's for sure. We've seen it since that fight. A lot of the young guns have come out and sort of put their name in the hat to hopefully get that Dominic Cruz fight. I think a fight with Cody Garbrandt makes sense. I mean, the first fight was somewhat shocking. We didn't think that Garbrandt was going to have that type of performance against Cruz, right? And since, we saw, although he picked up a pretty dominant win at 250, I'm talking about Garbrandt, of course, his career's still been on a downward trajectory. Now, we have hope that it might take a turn, and it did, obviously, at 250, but it's just starting to. So I think revisiting that fight would somewhat make sense. Also, I'd like to just throw that in there, but Aljamain Sterling, and goes, George said it kind of makes sense to put Garbrandt versus Sterling, but I do like Sterling to be sort of a replacement opponent for that main event for that bantamweight title fight between Jan and Aldo, because, on a regular circumstance, Aldo making 135, although he made it before, that gets a little bit tricky still, because, we know he's a bigger guy. And also, given the pandemic, the stuff that's happening with his coach and COVID-19, everything going on, you never know what can happen. And he seems to be ready to go, given the short nature of his fight. So keep him as a replacement. Don't book Aljamain Sterling for any fight. Possibly do Garbrandt versus Cruz. I think that's an interesting possibility, or just tell Garbrandt to sort of wait off, because that Jan Aldo fight is coming up somewhat soon, and I think taking on the loser of that fight, I think it would somewhat make sense. Aldo versus Garbrandt, sign me up. Aldo versus Jan, the guy who defeated Garbrandt's mentor in Uriah Faber, sure, sign me up as well. So I think the bantamweight division is full of interesting options. Either way you go, I don't think you can't go wrong, and you can't book a boring fight. I think we're in for some quality MMA in the next few months out of this UFC bantamweight division.
No doubt about it. It is all killer, no filler at 135 pounds. And if I'm Aljamain Sterling, I am not stepping into the cage unless there is a belt on the line right now. I'll be holding on until that title fight presents itself. Before we move on from 35, guys, just a very quick fire question for you. We mentioned Cody Garbrandt. Huge knockout with over Rafael Assunção, buzzer beater at the end of the second round in a co-main. But then we had Sean O'Malley as well, kicking off the main card with a big KO of his own against Eddie Wineland. Both hugely impressive KOs in the division. I know they're at slightly different points in their careers. Which one of those finishes impressed you more, and why? Just a few seconds each on this one. Goes, kick us off.
I got to go with O'Malley. They were both great, but when you have two great situations like that, you have to nitpick. I guess the only thing I can think of is Cody, while he unwound that big right hand, he did have that left hand very low, and he could have been countered with that shot, had he not missed. So if I had to nitpick, that would be it. For me, it's Sean O'Malley.
Danny, what do you reckon?
I'm going to go with Garbrandt. I mean, sure, Sean O'Malley was super impressive, and I like the way he set that up as well. And maybe was probably the more technical punch. But, I mean, Eddie Wineland, sure, he's tough as hell, and sure, he's a WEC veteran and former champion in that organization. But, he's not in the rankings. We're talking about Garbrandt pulling that kind of knockout against the top 5 guy in Rafael Assunção. So I got to go with Cody Garbrandt in this one.
George, what about you?
Yeah, usually when I determine that, I usually go by who's facing the tougher competition at the time. And no disrespect to Wineland, but right now, Assunção is just the tougher out. In fact, they said it, in those countdowns, that team's prepared for Assunção on many occasions. And they know there's just not many holes there, So I would say the Garbrandt KO. And may I say, I left out Moraes when I basically threw the whole bantamweight roster at you guys. Man, throw him against anyone. He's right at the top, too. Sorry, Magic Man.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that he beat Jose Aldo. It was well, the judges did. The judges certainly did. So he should definitely still be in that conversation. A lot of positivity on the show this week, and let's keep that rolling as we go into our final question. This weekend's UFC on ESPN 10 event at the UFC Apex features a main event between Jessica Eye and Cynthia Calvillo. It's a card that's taken a little bit of flack from fans on social media because it hasn't got the same star power as some of the UFC's previous events. But as I say, here on Spinning Back Clique, we like to look on the bright side of life. So for the final challenge this week, on a card that's getting a lot of hate, give us one big reason why the fans should tune in and check out the fights from Las Vegas this weekend. It is our last question of the day. Danny, bring us home.
Even if there are no big names in this card, let's remind people of the times that we're in. This is a pandemic, all right? Just a few weeks ago, we were complaining how, we needed sports back in our life. The UFC needs to, start back. I mean, this is horrible. We have no fights. And here the UFC is offering some fights some free fights. So easy. Give the UFC some slack. I mean, we know that there's travel bans. They can only work with US based fighters, and that restricts sort of the things they can do and the fights they can put together. And keep in mind, this is a very international sport as well. So, you know, lay off the UFC here. We're getting a free card and during a pandemic. So just be thankful for that. And just that alone, there's some great fights. I mean, I'm sure the guys will get into it, but I'm going to go with the obvious one, the main event. Sure, you know, Jessica, a former title challenger, and you got Cynthia Calvillo, a girl that we thought that had a lot to offer, but has had a few hiccups in the UFC, but it's really been surrounded her fighting in an improper weight class. For the first time here, we're going to see her fighting in a weight class where she belongs. We know her weight struggles. She's missed weight a few times at strawweight. So here she is getting a big opportunity against a big name in the division. And we're going to see what she has. And if she maybe is able to sort of put something together and become a threat to Valentina Shevchenko, who's become one of the most dominant champions in the UFC. So I'm excited for the fights and their fights. So I'm in.
Yeah, I'm with you, Danny. I'm with you. And huge opportunity for Cynthia Calvillo fighting at a more natural weight class. It's a big opportunity for her. George, give us some positivity heading into this one. What are you most looking forward to this weekend?
Look, I agree with the fans. If you look at the card, yeah, of course it doesn't have some of the star power that some of the other fight nights don't have. But like Danny was saying, half the roster is not available to them. And even the ones that are North American based and can get there, there's a few that have said, hey, I'm going to wait a few events out. I don't feel comfortable. But look, it's easy. Dan Ige, Gilbert Burns, Drew Dober, names like that are the ones that rise to the occasion and make a name for themselves in the last year and a half. And those are names where you would have looked at the card and go, man, now who's fighting? You know what I mean? And now they're actual stars, and we're getting excited about them. Plus, there's the other part where there's a veteran. Does Overeem still have it? Does Big Ben Rothwell still have it? Does Glover Teixeira still have it? Apparently they do. So the UFC also does a good job of recycling in some of the veterans that may have one last run. So you have to tune in because you have 12 fights in front of you, man. Good stuff's going to happen.
Absolutely. Goes, what stands out to you this weekend?
Well, we're back at the Apex in Las Vegas, the fight capital of the world, but it's also the gambling capital of the world. And you look at this card, there's 7 fights that have favorites that are below 200 in the $100 range, okay? So what that means is they're basically saying, these odds makers, that you have very even matchups. And when you have very even matchups, I feel they're more interesting. You have the lower weight classes featured on this card, which means you're going to get a lot of scraps. Those fights are going to be all over that cage. So really, I think when you think about everything in the long run, like, what else are you going to do? I was watching marble races the other day, guys. So I'm definitely tuning in. There's nothing else to do. They're going to be even matchups. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Amen to that. And I'll be staying up till stupid o'clock in the morning as usual from here in the UK to watch every single one of them. So that's pretty much all we got time for this week on this special live edition of Spinning Back Clique. A huge thank you to Gorgeous George and Goes from Sin City, and also to Danny Segura checking in there from Brooklyn, New York. I'm Simon Head. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the show. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and we'll be right back here to talk it all over next week.